Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. It's not often we can say that one sentence triggered a complete change of direction in our life. But that happened to me a while ago with today's guest. I was feeling a bit stuck in my art. I felt I had been repeating the same ideas and patterns for 4 or 5 years, and I wanted to shake things up a little bit. So I took a class with him at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum to see if I could somehow get out of that rut. On day two of the class, I was still feeling stuck, but then one of my fellow students asked a question. I don't even remember what the question was, and the instructor answered, "Well, what were you drawing when you were 7 years old?" And that sentence kind of hit me like a baseball bat. What if, instead of trying to reinvent my own wheel, I just went back to my early beginnings and drew inspiration from that? That sentence, which wasn't even said to me, unlocked something in my artist mind that led to a fresh perspective on my art and something that I feel still continues to help me evolve my work. And this wise instructor is my guest today. So let's welcome to the Art Colony podcast, Pete Hocking. How are you, Pete?
Good. How are you?
Did you know that story?
I didn't, and I'm so glad to hear it.
Uh-huh.
And to cite my sources, I learned that 7-year-old focus from an extraordinary artist named Nayland Blake, who is based in New York, and is someone I've just learned an enormous amount from over time. And it's this thing that 7 years old is this like magical moment when we know ourselves, we know what we like and we don't like, but we're not sort of beaten down by peer pressure yet. And if you can go back in time to that moment, there's so much to learn about who we are, like
Hmm.
what our real passions are. So
Well,
I'm
it
so
really
glad it
unlocked
worked.
something for me, and I still think of that all the time. Now, to all our listeners who might not know who Pete Hocking is, you'll have to tell us, who is Pete Hocking?
I've been thinking a lot about that question. I just turned 60, and I was reading a book of essays by Maxine Greene, who is a philosopher of education, who 30 years ago was really important to me foundationally, and she asked this question that's essentially about the journey that we're on, and she asks it in a kind of ethical way of like, how do we make sense of where we've come from and where we are and how those pieces fit together. And I've had a kind of extraordinary set of opportunities. I went to art school as a college student, but then I got really engaged with questions of social activism, and I ended up teaching activism and leadership both at Brown University and Rhode Island School of Design for like 24 years, while simultaneously being a professor of art at Goddard College. And all of those things fed me in all of these amazing ways. But they also were, in a sense, a way that I deferred my own creative life. And I think about this a lot of those of us who are artists and teachers. Where is it that, in service to advancing and enabling the creativity of others, do we give up our own creative lives? And so in 2012, I had an opportunity to move to Provincetown, which kind of was a childhood dream because I'd spent a lot of time on Cape Cod as a kid because I had family here.
Can you tell us more about that, about your early childhood experiences here on Cape Cod?
Yeah, my mother's cousin lived in Wellfleet, and we would come several times a year. And sometimes, as I got i- into adolescence, I would get dropped off for periods of time in the summer with my 10 speed, to date myself. And I was
We
a,
had one too. It's okay.
I know I was a really avid bicycle rider, and we're Gen X, so we were sort of unsupervised in large swaths of the day. And I would take off and explore. And some of that was old back roads between Wellfleet and Truro. and some of it occasionally was that I just got in my head that I was gonna ride my bike to Provincetown for the afternoon and see what was going on. And I'll be honest, my family were homophobic in the style of the time, and, a and there was a kind of discourse on how the gays were ruining Provincetown, and I remember thinking, like, "I've gotta check this out, like, what's this all about?" And I'd ride my bike up here, and I'd just sort of, cruise around, not in the gay sense, but in the 13-year-old sense on a 10 speed and check it out. And it was transformational in a number of senses. One was I was coming up in the middle of the afternoon, so the kind of the signs and symbols of gay life were not really evident. And this is the late 70s,
They
early
were all at the
80s.
beach at that time.
Everyone was at the beach, sure. And
Yeah.
and it was pre-pride flag and pre sort of, I remember seeing some things like um Marilyn Monroe cutouts in like thrift store windows and being like, well, that's kind of gay. But I was here when the tourists were here, and yet still there was something bohemian about the place that really spoke to me. And I remember on one of these afternoons, I just had a moment where I was on Ocean View Drive in Wellfleet, and it was just a particularly perfect day. And I thought to myself, I want to paint this, and I want to live here. And it was so clear. And there's a gallery, the Golden Cod Gallery in Wellfleet, which is literally right on the road. And they had these open stalls with paintings in. And as a 13-year-old, I didn't have to go in and talk to any adult, but I could look at the work. And it gave me this sort of like, oh, this is you can make pictures and sell them. And 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 in that afternoon when I was 13 years old, it all came together. And I went and my parents came to pick me up and I was like, I got it figured out. I'm gonna move here and I'm gonna be a painter. And the response was like sharp. No, you are not. There are no jobs on Cape Cod, and painters are queer. And it took me a little time, but I did it. It took me, I think, 33 years, but here I am.
Were you the kind of child who drew a lot, who was always doing art?
Absolutely. I just, drawing. In a lot of ways, I'm known as a painter, and I am a painter. I do paint, but I think of myself as a picture maker because I'm less concerned with the media, and I'm less concerned with the hierarchies within the art world of like oil painting is better than watercolor or whatever that nonsense is. And I like to make pictures as a photographer, as a painter, as someone who draws. I don't have any bias about like people will sign up for my workshops and they're like, I don't oil paint. Is that okay? I'm like, well, what kind of paint is it? And they're like, you know, I use gouache or watercolor. I'm like, that's great. I love that. Like, I love paint.
On your social media feed, I
Mhm.
very often see cartoons popping up.
Oh, the
Comics. Yeah,
bears.
comics and cartoons. So was this something that influenced your perception of art as you were a kid, reading cartoons and comic books?
Yeah. So there was a story in my family that my sister was the reader and I wasn't a good reader. And a lot of that was that my mother would hand me like Treasure Island and I'd be like, what's this old book that smells funny? Like, I want to read that stack of comic books over there. And a- and it persisted through my education after I was a perfectly competent reader. And in school, I was reading like 2 grades ahead, but at home, I wasn't the good reader. And that shifted one day when my parents had a parent teacher conference. And and I and the teacher was like, why does he know all this stuff about World War II? And my parents was like, he knows stuff about World War II. And like my mother came home and like, how do you know who the British prime minister in World War II was? And I was like, from comic books. Like, and she was horrified when she went back to the teacher. And finally, someone with authority said, it doesn't matter what he reads as long as he's reading. And that introduction to that medium, which is a fusion of image and text, a fusion of literary storytelling with visual storytelling, super important to me. So a lot of my early um, uh, work, my early work was, reproducing comic book pages or panels or drawing superheroes. Um, Even though now I have a sort of rep on social media for being a Snoopy guy.
Oh, yeah, lately you've been posting a lot of
Yeah,
Snoopy.
like, I had these old Snoopy books that were handed down to me. They were like reprints from the 1950s, the early stuff. And I just read them over and over again, but it's not like I was drawing that stuff. Like I liked a guy with a little bit of muscle and spandex. So that's what I was.
My mother worked for Metropolitan Life Insurance,
Oh, yeah.
so we had Snoopy stuff all over
Oh,
because Snoopy
right.
was the mascot for Metropolitan Life
Absolutely.
Insurance.
Love that.
Yeah. So to go back to my original question at the very beginning, so what were you drawing when you were 7 years old?
Oh, I was probably drawing superheroes. I remember drawing actually a lot of landscapes. I mean, my 7-year-old story is, and part of this is like, what did you do that you were crazy about doing that you really loved? But also, what did you do that you loved so much that you got in trouble for it? And for me, it was running into the woods. There are these trails across the street on this old farmland that had grown into woods, and it's where I wanted to spend my time. And I look at my life now, and all I want to do is like hike around the Cape Cod woods and draw them. So it's a direct line. Not
It,
very complex.
it's funny you got in trouble for that because for me it was the opposite. My parents knew I was safe if I was in the woods. We
Yeah.
lived in the woods, so they knew that if I was nowhere to be seen, I was somewhere in the woods. I was safe. I was fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was that I was very young, and as I got older, more towards 10, it was totally fine. But when I was 7, and I think, there were some dangerous parts back there, that there were some ponds, and there was an old dump, and I think they knew that I'd be digging through the old dump.
Always curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome back. Just a reminder to follow us on Instagram at the Art Colony Podcast. And also, if you want to support the podcast, you can do so by going to buymeacoffee.com, do a search for the Art Colony Podcast, and you can leave us a little tip to help support the podcast. And another thing I want to mention, I was looking at when this podcast is going to air, which is the last week of April. And that means it's been 1 year since I came to see Chad Rossi. And I said, Chad, I heard you do some podcasts. I have an idea for you. So actually, we've been working on this podcast for 1 year now, Chad Rossi and I. So yeah, it's a momentous week. And as the summer progresses, we're going to have a special event at some point to commemorate the official first year of the podcast. So stay tuned. Might be something like a live recording or something like that, but stay tuned. We'll let you know. But again, thank you, Chad Rossi, for helping me out for the last year. And thank you to all the listeners who have been with me for the last year. And tell all your friends. We keep on getting more listeners every week. So we love that. So, Pete, we're back
That's
at you
that's
now.
so exciting.
It is.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. No, it has been quite the journey. The whole thing started because I literally woke up in the middle of the night on April 29th last year with the whole concept completely formed in my head. Like, I want a podcast. This is going to be the title. These will be my guests, and this is what we're going to talk about. Dreams do weird things sometimes.
Absolutely
Yeah.
amazing.
So, if you were to describe your work to somebody who's never seen it, how would you describe your work?
So as a painter, what I'm known for here is sort of different from what I've done over time. Although I shouldn't say that. So when I was in art school, I started painting landscapes, and there's a direct relationship between that work and what I'm doing now. And when I was in graduate school, I went to a graduate school where painting was not very popular.
Which school was that?
Goddard College.
Which where you were teaching later? Yeah.
Yeah, and my MFA is in interdisciplinary art. So the focus of that graduate program was really looking at the spaces between established disciplines, and I got a lot out of it. So I don't mean to be negative, but there weren't a lot of people there who were very excited about painting, and for painters of my generation, that was a pretty common experience. That the people who are a generation before us fought the modernist painters to make space for conceptual work, for ecological work, for installation, for work that was feminist, all things that I'm really interested in and really supportive of. But that's not who I'm a picture maker, and what painters of my generation often talk about is we had to create a conceptual hook on which to hang the work. And so that took me into the world of figurative painting. And a lot of that work was around queer themes, but also an exploration of my experience as an adopted person, someone who had never until his 40s met someone to whom he was biologically related. And so the work was really about seeing oneself and oneself gesture uh, reflected back.
Because you do a lot of self portraits,
Yeah,
both
that's where
in
that work
painting
is.
and in photography.
Yeah,
And that's the origin of that?
absolutely.
Oh, that's interesting.
And one of the things about this is before selfie culture. I've done a daily photographic self portrait every day since September 27th, 2001.
It's a deep archive.
Yeah.
I find it interesting. This is not on my notes right now, but I've been meeting so many artists in the last year who were adopted.
Mm.
And I wonder if there's something about the adoptive experience that, leads people to be more artistic or more, I don't know. Do you have a comment about that?
I think there's a lot of ways that people experience adoption. Um, but I think one of them has to do with the necessity early on in considering your place in the world. Because adoption ultimately is about a certain, it's a process. You're taken from one place and put to another. It's a kind of transplanting, if you will. And the climate in which you find yourself transplanted may not be your vibe. And so part of that process is finding your place in the world. Whenever I say this, people who grow up in biologically intact families are like, well, my family wasn't perfect either, and I get that. Family life can be complicated in all sorts of ways. But there's something about seeing your gesture or something about yourself reflected in the bodies of the people around you that gives you a sense of place. It might not be a comfortable place, it might not be a happy place. It may be the best place in the world. But when you're adopted, you're always aware. It's interesting for me, it was like I learned I was adopted when I was 8. So 7 was a kind of blissful beforehand time for me. So maybe that's why I use that so often. But everything changed for me once I sort of learned that because I suddenly realized that and this unfolded over time. All these people were complicit in the knowledge that I was adopted, that this knowledge that I didn't know until I was 8 years old, and no one talked about it. No one talked about it ever. I mean, so you deal with these sort of issues of shame as well. And I think no matter how progressively, thoughtfully, lovingly a family works with issues of adoption, there's always eh, there's always in the back of your mind, yeah, but I was surrendered. Um, and that's stuff that is there. And I think for me, looking at my body and trying to imagine or find that sense of lineage, that sense of place, was really important. And I've had some profound. I mean, one of the reasons I'm on Camp Cape Cod right now is that I learned my birth mother's identity because she died, and she's buried on Cape Cod. And when I visited her grave, I started writing about discovering her, um, and uh, and I was like, "Oh, I should do this writing here." So, I actually came to Provincetown not to be a picture maker, but to be a writer.
How did that go?
Well, ultimately, I I pursued an MFA in creative writing,
Okay.
and I have a manuscript that is in desperate need of revision. Um, it's on my list of creative projects that always gets put off. Um, I love literature. I love writing. I got an enormous amount from doing an MFA in creative writing. I learned an incredible amount, and it's been like 12 years now that I did that, and I remember doing it, being like, "You're going to be 50 when you like did this. Like, that's not like why are you even doing this? Like, you're old." And realizing that it was a kind of transformational moment that continues to unfold for me. Um, However, basically, in parallel to that, I was invited to show some paintings in Provincetown and started to paint here. And so while I was doing the MFA in creative writing, I was also re entering my painting practice. And the first line of my thesis for my creative writing degree is nothing got me back to the painting studio faster than doing an MFA in creative writing. And that wasn't a diss on the program, but it was a discerning process for me that I realized first and foremost, I make meaning through pictures. And as much as I like writing and as good as I might think I am, or, get feedback that it's good writing or whatever those things are, that's a secondary way for me to construct meaning.
And coming back to the Cape and moving back to the Cape, did
Mm.
that change the visuals that you were producing? Did that change your paintings?
Yeah, when I first started painting here, um, I was working in town at a studio on Commercial Street, which I was living in. This was an apartment that I was using as a studio. Um, and I started to do streetscapes largely, looking at, one of the beautiful things about Provincetown is that it's more like a European town than an American town in the way that it's layered, that house is in front of house. And so there's spatially, this place is absolutely incredible.
It was created before cars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But it was also created in this really compressed little sliver of land that's habitable as a town. And there's no zoning regulations, and there were no deeds to speak of when, the architecture of the town got set up. So it's kind of, it's this guerrilla architecture of like, there's a space, let's put a building there. And what does that do? And how does that activate our, visual imagination? So I was painting a lot of that. And then I was spending more and more time in the national seashore and hiking more and more. And that allowed me to make paintings that were more abstract and more about natural processes, and also the relationship between the human and non-human world in a way. And I've been thinking about this a lot. One of the painters that I absolutely love is a woman named Joan Erdley, who died tragically young of breast cancer in, I believe, 1961. And she's sort of known today as like the great Scottish painter of the 20th century. And she painted both in Glasgow and where she had a urban studio, and in a really small, like 200-person fishing village, uh, s- 15 miles outside of Aberdeen, called Caterlin. And there's a real parallel between Caterlin and the Outer Cape in some ways, at least in my story of it. And she was a lesbian, and her work isn't in the queer canon. And Jack Halberstam, who's a queer theory uh, thinker, has written about that. And in queer painting, often to be seen requires a body, and a body doing queer things. Um, and uh, and yet, Erdley's paintings are are queer in the way that they're constructed, and they're about both the making and the unmaking of the world. and the fragility of these kind of coastal places. I am nowhere near as brilliant a painter as Joan Erdley. But there's something in that that I'm trying to focus on is the fragility of this place as it speaks to the bigger fragility of our climate, on a planetary scale, of, our rapidly faltering social and political systems globally. That how is it that we're looking at those things? And and I see here, the forces of time and climate and just planetary forces that are unmaking the world. And I think the question that I'm starting to turn to is, what is it that we're doing to remake the world? And I think that's a thing that artists are really good at, actually. And I think it's the work that's in front of us.
That's interesting um, hearing your philosophy behind your paintings. A lot of your paintings are about the dunes,
Mhm.
and I've always seen them as extremely dynamic. Your brushstroke is firm and it's precise, and the way the lines are tugging at each other in the painting really makes it feel like it is the force of nature pulling against each other, pulling with each other, trying to figure out how to make this work. Because yeah, your work has a lot of this. It's a still landscape. It's the dunes, but you feel speed.
Mm.
You feel movement in it.
Because I'm a walker.
Yeah, and walking is a big part of your artistic practice.
Yeah. There's another piece to this that when I first got here, I read Mary Heaton Vorse's book, Time in the Town. I'm an amateur historian, and I love to immerse myself in the history, the lore, the legend, the way we think about places, and how that understanding is layered over time. And she, in that book, has a section where she's writing about the dune shacks and the artists that she knew who were out there and what it was like to travel out there. And she makes a comment about the dunes, that they are vast and awesome. And I take that with her language to mean that kind of literally, that, tying back to the artistic idea of the sublime, that they are both extremely beautiful, but they're also dangerous. There's something a little bit uncanny or scary about them. And then the next line is, our very talented painters have not been able to approach this subject matter. Their attempts are anemic and unsatisfying, or something like that. And I was like, well, there's the artistic challenge, right?
Hmm.
Mary Heaton Vorse has thrown the glove down, and I want to make paintings of those dunes that are vast and awesome and speak to the experience of trekking through them.
And you trek a lot.
I try. I
I
try.
mean, there's days when you're out, well, you walk miles and miles and miles in those dunes.
You know, I have that reputation. And it's one of my goals for this summer is to get back to more rigorous walking schedule. When I was in Provincetown and my studio was here, I had these kind of loops worked out. So if I had a little time, I had a 3 mile loop. And if I had a little more, I had a 6. And then I had an 8. And then I had a 13 mile loop. And so most days I would do 10 miles because, if I was doing the 3 mile loop, I'd do it 3 times a day. Um, and and now, I live in Truro. I love where I live, but it's a car culture. It's not a walking culture. And I live on Route 6, so I can get to places that I can walk relatively easily. But the sort of, walking down Route 6 to get to one of those places is not my favorite thing.
On Instagram, I see very often you have companions on these walks.
Yes.
And I haven't been on a walk with you yet, but I'm always wondering, on these walks, do you talk all the way through or are you silent all the way through? What sort of relationship do you have with your companions on these walks?
Well, I think it's different with different people. So I have a very good friend, Cole Cook, who I walk with a lot.
He's going to be on the podcast soon. We'll
Excellent.
make it happen.
Excellent.
I haven't had a wood sculptor yet, so I need to
Yeah,
have him. Yeah.
he's amazing. We met about 3.5 years ago. And the first when he moved to town, he came to an opening I had, and I said, "Let's take a walk." And on the first walk, he he tells the story of, um, "You got silent at a point, and I didn't know if you hated me and if this was, like, going terribly wrong, but it's actually become part of, like, we talk, and then we think, and then we talk." Where with other people, especially people who I don't see very often, it's like a nonstop narrative, like, we're really walking is a way of connecting. Um, there are people, like, with Cole that I can do field work with because both of us understand that there are moments that we're gonna stop and we're gonna observe something and maybe take some photographs. Where there are other people I walk with where, like, to do that is to kind of say that I'm not paying full attention to them, and that maybe it's a little bit impolite to do. So it's different.
So, Pete, a lot of people in town here know you as a teacher. It's a very big part of your artistic practice. It seems like you're always offering some workshop somewhere every day of the year. Can you tell us more about your relationship with teaching?
Absolutely. I think, again, going back to 7 years old,
Uh huh.
I think I was a little chatterbox who was a little bit precocious, and part of that is part of being adopted, that my parents and their people were all in their 40s, and they were in their 50s by the time I was 7. So, I wasn't hanging out with, like, young people. I was hanging out with, like, adults who talked in full sentences. But my next door neighbor, who I was very close to, she looked at me one day and she goes, "You're gonna be a teacher." And I was like, "No, I'm not." But she saw that I was gonna be an artist and she saw that I was gonna be a teacher. She's the person who named stuff. Like, she saw me in a way that my parents didn't see me. I resisted that sort of for a long time. My teaching practice is integrated with my practice as a maker. And I am right before we sat down, I was finishing up a workshop. Like, this is a week where I have 3 online workshops, 2 on Tuesday and 1 on Wednesday. And the conversations that emerge in those workshops are incredibly important to me in terms of thinking about my own work and the possibilities in my work. And I have a philosophy of teaching painting, that there are 3 things that you have to do, and it's my job to facilitate in a workshop. One is you look at painting, second is you talk about painting, and the third is that you paint. A lot of people will say to me, like, "How can you teach painting online?" And uh, if someone wants to learn color mixing, it is so much better to take a live workshop with someone who can physically show you that stuff. But if you know some of the basics, um, I can do some of that teaching online. But if you know the basics and you're trying to develop a practice, um, online can be great because it creates a community. It's not just me, but part of my work is to cultivate the relationships between the people who are in that group. I limit them to 8 so everyone is knowable. And we look at people's work and we hear their questions and we engage with them as serious painters, not as like beginners or intermediate or whatever. Everyone in those workshops is a painter.
You seem to teach also in many different fields and techniques and ideas. How do you come up with a new class? Is this based on what you're working on now, or is it an idea you've been marinating for a long time? How do you come up with all these many different topics you teach?
There's an old joke that I learned when I was a professor. You'd be at a cocktail party and someone would be talking about a new book in the field that had just come out, and you'd say, "Well, have you read it yet?" And the response is, "Read it? I haven't even taught it." And so there's this way in which teaching sometimes is me saying, like, I want to think about figurative painting again. Maybe I'll teach a figurative course. I want to think about queer figurative painting. Maybe I'll do that. I want to think about queer men in images, and maybe I'll do that. But sometimes it's I left a gallery that I'd been part of for over a decade. And one of the reasons I left was I recognized that being there, um, and also working there, was inhibiting a certain poetry in my work that I had seen before. So I ended up teaching a bunch of workshops that was about painting as poetry, like visual poetry and thinking about. And so, yeah, some of it comes out of my experience. Some of it comes because people say, "Will you teach this thing?" Like, I'm really interested in this. And that's, my training, as a professor is that it's fun to research and develop a new course because it takes you into a new terrain. And I know how to research, I know how to put it together, and we go from there.
And if one of our listeners wants to take an art class that they never have before,
Mm.
what sort of advice would you give to somebody who, let's say, has never picked up a paintbrush, or somebody who hasn't been drawing for 20 years, but they want to get back into it? What sort of advice do you have for students who want to start this thing?
I often have people show up in my workshops and say, "Is it okay? I'm not experienced." And I don't do beginner, intermediary, or advanced workshops because having people at different experiential levels allows us to be co-learners with one another. And sometimes the um, the person who is new will ask the beginner's question, and I'll have people who are really quite advanced painters come up to me afterwards and say, "I'm so glad that someone asked that question because I've wondered about that forever, and your answer was really useful." So I think one of my pieces of advice is to find a community of people who are doing the thing that you're interested in and find your way in. And that may be through taking a workshop. Some of my workshops that are online, people who take them over and over again because of they've met someone across the country who they really connect with, and they have email exchanges and sometimes phone calls, and these relationships form, and they like to be in the group together. And sometimes those groups aren't because people are looking to learn something specific, but they're looking to anchor their practice in a community. I'm fortunate in that I have opportunities to show my work in galleries and exhibitions. Not everyone has that experience. And so groups like this can be a way to have an audience that witnesses you in a serious, caring, and committed way.
Now, this episode's going to air the last week of April.
Mm.
So, do you have any opportunities coming up soon that you can talk about, or do you have a place where people can go to find out what you'll be teaching in the next few months or year?
So I have a website, which is petehocking.com. And there's a workshop page there. And I list the workshops that I'm offering, generally season by season. Um, I need to update it right now. I do have an online workshop that's starting May 5th that has one place available in it. And my Fine Arts Work Center workshop in the beginning of July is full. I'll be teaching at the Truro Center for the Arts, a live workshop the third week of July, which will be uh, which still has spaces in it. And I'll be at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum in the third week of September, which is I love season workshops like that one. I just did one in March at PAM, and I love them because it's an opportunity for people who live here year round. It's like it's our turn now. And
Hmm.
and so the community that emerges and the connections that emerge in those workshops are really extraordinary. I'm going to do one other thing this summer, which is kind of a pickup game. The Cape Cod Collaborative, which is a professional development opportunity for people who are mental health practitioners, social workers, and therapists, happens in Orleans over the course of the summer. And their workshops generally are at the middle school in Orleans. But they asked to borrow a painting of mine for their promotional materials. And I will be doing, I think it's on Wednesday afternoons for most of July and August, a pickup session, $25, 2 hours in the afternoon, and I think we're gonna meet at Fort Hill in Eastham, because it's got free parking and it's relatively central.
You're busy.
Yeah,
You're busy. Now, you talked about doing classes online,
yeah.
and one thing that I find really awesome about you is that you've really adopted technology
Mm,
and also social media.
mhm.
Social media plays a great role in your daily life, even because you post daily, and I guess it also helps in your promotion. Can you talk about your relationship with social media?
Yeah, so I'm an early adopter to social media. So we talked a little bit about my MFA in interdisciplinary arts. My thesis was written on LiveJournal, which is a social media platform that was a blogging platform, but allowed for interconnection and social media type contacts. That was really popular around 2000 to 2006. And so my thesis was written on that platform. And some of the people who I'm still engaging with on Instagram and Facebook and Blue Sky and other platforms are people I met there 25 years ago. Um, and and one of the things that I'm really interested in is sort of an idea of living out loud. And, people think they know me from my social media posts. And there's all sorts of stuff that I just don't ever post about. But there's um there's a way in which I'm trying to tell a story about what it means to commit to a creative life. And when I first got to Provincetown in 2012, um, it was still relatively early days in like the Facebook world. Um, and and I would post photographs. Um, and for me, I was living out this childhood dream of moving to Cape Cod. And I very quickly realized I was not the only person who had this childhood dream, after posting some photographs. And I realized that one thing that came up over and over again was, what's it like there in the winter? And I moved here on January 1st, so I was doing this winter thing. And so from there, I feel like I'm doing a durational documentary about what it's like to be a creative person wandering through these towns. I mean, my life is really the Outer Cape. I haven't been over the bridge in 4 years. After a long period of time of constantly going over the bridge, I was like, I'm here for a while. I'm going to go over the bridge soon because I have to deliver some work to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware,
You'll be
and
fine.
I'll be fine. I know. I go back to there's a famous moment where a snobby person is asking Henry Thoreau, have you traveled, implying like, has he been to Europe? And his response is, I've traveled extensively and conquered. And I feel like the last 4 years have been traveling extensively on the Outer Cape and getting to know this place in as intimate a way as I can. And documenting that and having this kind of ongoing. I've got like 44,000 posts on my Instagram. And so it's impossible to go super deep. Like you can go, but like you're going to get to like last November and exhaust yourself. So it's a kind of interesting thing, but it's a document, it's an archive.
That will be somebody's thesis one day.
That's right. That's right.
Going through Pete's posts. So, if people want to find you on Instagram, what's your handle?
It's a Hocking, Hocking. I have a few Instagrams, but that's the main one.
Okay. And on Facebook and Blue Sky?
Facebook is just my name, and I have no idea what my Blue Sky handle is, but it's probably like P Hawking or Pete Hawking or
Mhm.
something.
You never go by Peter?
No, so that's a funny question
Oh,
in terms
okay.
of social media, which is when I started my first website in 2020, there was a young photographer in Maryland who had grabbed peterhawking.com. And I was like, screw him. Um, and I racked my brains for what I'd go for. And then I realized, like, oh, my parents call me Pete. Why don't I just adopt that as my professional name? So anyone who knows me before Cape Cod calls me Peter, and anyone who knows me after moving here calls me Pete. But I don't hear the difference, and I don't have any preference at all.
I've always known you only as Pete, so I guess I'm later in this in the calendar. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's that funny sort of thing. I have people who will look at me very sternly and say, "You are not a Pete. You are a Peter." And I'm like, "All right, well, that's your thing. It's not mine."
Okay, Pete, we're now at the end of the interview, which means we have to go through the speed round. It's a rite of passage. Everybody has to do it.
I'm ready.
So I'm going to give you two choices, and you have to choose one and then justify your choice. So, considering you walk so much,
Mm.
do you prefer a morning walk or an evening walk?
Evening. The light is really amazing as we get to the end of the day because it's really low. And that's certainly true of sunsets or sunrises as well. And I used to get up for the sunrise, but now that I don't have a day job, I don't make it up for the sunrise.
Well, you can get up for, I don't know, the gym or something, no?
Let's not get crazy here
Okay,
with the
let's not
speed
get
round.
crazy. Okay. I'm giving you two possible destinations for a walk. You have to choose one.
Mm.
Are you going to go to Long Point or Race Point?
Oh, I need to go to Long Point. I haven't done that in like 5 years. That's an incredible walk. It takes a little planning, and my walks often are spontaneous. Like, I'm in the mood, or I need to get away from this, or whatever. And getting out to Long Point, the tide has to be right, and you have to have water, and there's all of these sort of things. But it's absolutely incredible out there.
It is. Um, the very first day I met my partner, Carrie, um, we met and he said, "Have you ever been to Long Point?" And I mean, I had met him like 2 hours
Mm.
before. I said, "No." He said, "Well, let's go." So we got on our bikes. I didn't have a bottle of water. I didn't have anything.
Mhm.
Thankfully, I had a hat. But this was in August. We crossed the breakwater, walked all the way down Long Point. I was thinking, I'm going to die
Yeah.
because I was completely parched. But thankfully, there was a ferry. There's a ferry at the end of
Oh,
Long
right,
Point in the
right, right,
summer
right. Yeah.
that can take you back.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. I think I know the answer already. But you have a free evening. What do? You read a book or you watch a movie?
Book.
Yeah, I thought that's what you were going to say.
Yeah.
You ever watch movies?
There's a joke amongst my friends that if there's like someone says, "Have you seen?" The answer is no before you even tell me the
Uh
title.
huh. I'm getting there as well. I haven't missed the movies in quite a while. Okay, next one. This I think is going to be a hard one. You have to choose Batman or Spider Man.
Oh, Batman.
Oh, really?
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought you would say Spider Man.
Batman has long been a kind of source of fascination for me. Um, Again, going to 7-year-old thing, like there were two orphans that I knew, and one was Bruce Wayne, and the other was Clark Kent.
Oh, okay.
Um, I think the other sort of piece of it, which is kind of funny, is I was born the morning after the premiere of the Batman TV show in 1966.
Well, you're linked then.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
totally linked.
Well, the last question is always the most important one. So, hot dog or hamburger?
I'm a pescatarian.
Okay. Um, let's me rephrase that. Okay. Lobster roll or fish burger?
Lobster roll.
Lobster roll. Oh, yeah, it's true. I forgot that. You're a pescatarian. Oh, well. Because I was actually going through things today. I was thinking, well, I know he's gluten free, so I have to be careful about that.
Mhm.
But, anyways, okay, so lobster roll.
Absolutely.
Okay, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you have it. Well, good, Pete. This has been fascinating. I learned so much about you today.
Oh, this is just such an honor to be part of this, and congratulations on a year of podcasts.
Yeah,
And
well, this is a year of working on it, but the podcast was launched on August 11th. So we'll have the official 1 year at some point in the middle of the summer. But I'm very glad you've been part of this first year.
absolutely, and we could take a walk and do a live podcast on the walk.
Oh, well, let's see if Chad can organize that. Chad. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Come back next week, same bat channel, and have a great day.